The next question I have says, what are the options for resolution on the conflict? Have there been discussions with leaders of Palestine and Israel? And if so, is there a possibility of sharing the Gaza Strip, as Jerusalem is seen as a shared holy place? There's a bit of misunderstanding in this question.
Yeah, and it's so funny because I feel like the question itself demonstrates the problems, right? Is that like people just don't know enough. I mean, the question itself, sharing Gaza, Israel's kind of given up on Gaza. Israel's not even demanding Gaza anymore. That is a territory we withdrew from back in 2005. We kind of washed our hands of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that, and I should stress that when we did that, we had to evict 8,500 Jews who were living in Gaza from their homes. So it was a washing our hands of it. And it was incredibly painful because 8,500 people were, again, kicked out of their homes, some of them children. That was the only reality they ever knew. But regardless, I mean, it's such a misguided question of this notion of why would we share Gaza? They have Gaza. It's theirs. They can do what they want with it.
Yeah.
We just don't want them to be firing rockets across our border or digging tunnels underneath our border to try to commit terrorist attacks inside of Israel. Other than that, you can do what you want to do with Gaza. It's not our, it's yours now.
Yeah.
Like we're gone. In terms of resolution to the conflict, there's been many. I mean, there's been many attempts. Right now, usually there's two ideas that are thrown around. One is called the two-state solution. One is called the one-state solution. The two-state solution, I would say, has been the accepted solution throughout much of the world. Going all the way back, I mean, you could even say to 1947 when there was an early attempt to solve the conflict where you had Arabs and you had Jews living on the same land, both claiming a legitimate claim to that land due to their history in that land, and both do have histories in that land. And so there was an attempt to divide the land. 55% was going to go to the Jews, 45% was going to go to the Arabs. That was known as the 1947 partition plan. Unfortunately, Arab leadership rejected it. They started a war, and Israel emerged during that war. The territory that was supposed to become an Arab Palestinian state, part of it was taken by Egypt and Jordan, i.e. the Gaza Strip by Egypt and the West Bank by Jordan. And then Egypt and Jordan remained there for the next 18 years. And it's weird that during that time period, the Palestinian Arabs never rose up saying, hey, Jordan and Egypt, why don't you leave and we can have this territory as a Palestinian state?
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because of a much longer conversation about the evolution of Palestinian nationalism versus broader pan-Arabism, which was at the time in the 50s and 60s kind of the more predominant ideology that was held by leaders like Yasser Arafat, who becomes the leader of the PLO eventually, and eventually the figurehead of the Palestinians until his death in 2004. So two-state solution has always been the kind of the push forward. There were then real attempts at that once the Palestinian national identity was very much solidified and the Palestinians had their own representative body, which was the PLO. By the 1990s, Israel and the Palestinians sat down and discussed this idea of Palestinian self-government in parts of the territory. That is what prompted Israel to withdraw from parts of the territories. Parts of Gaza, about 80% of Gaza, and about 40% of the West Bank, handing it over to this newly established government, the Palestinian Authority, to then be able to govern themselves and govern their own people in that land. And that was supposed to be part of an eventual final process that was supposed to ultimately end with self-government for the Palestinians and Israel alongside it. And as time went on, it became, okay, no, there needs to be a full-blown Palestinian state. And then there were two attempts in the last 25 years. One was in the year 2000, where Israel agreed to withdraw from all of Gaza and from 97% of the West Bank with land swaps to create this two-state reality where the Palestinians would have a state in 97% of the West Bank, again, with land swaps, and 100% of Gaza. It was rejected, unfortunately, by Yasser Arafat at the time, and a war of terrorism was launched, which lasted about 4.5 years, that took the lives of over 1,000 Israelis, and 1,000 innocent Palestinians will also die during that time period. And then in 2008, there was another attempt by another prime minister in Israel, Ehud Olmert, who offered the current president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, 100% of Gaza, which we had already withdrawn from, and 100% of the West Bank with land swaps, and it was also rejected. And so the attempts at resolutions have been there. Israel has always consistently said, if you're willing to sit at the negotiating table, we will be there. Now, the Palestinians, unfortunately, have through these many rejections and through other steps that they've also taken, have demonstrated a lack of willingness to want to negotiate. Now, I should also put that on Israel as well. For the Palestinians, there are certain things that they would also say Israel has done to demonstrate that they're not interested in an actual resolution, like, for example, building settlements in the West Bank. Now, what people have to understand is while there's a part of Israel that believes in the two-state solution, not everyone has always been on board with that. There is a right-wing base in Israel that has never believed in the two-state solution. They don't believe that the Palestinians should have self-government in that land. Some of them would argue that Israel should just take control over all of the West Bank, apply their sovereignty there. Some would say give the Palestinian citizenship. Some would say not, which obviously has its own whole host of problems. And so what's happened, and I would say over the last 10 years in Israel, is due to the many rejections, and not just rejections, but rejections that were then followed by waves of terrorism. Many Israelis are in the place of, and then the withdrawal from Gaza, I should add, which also resulted then in more violence, right? Rocket fire from Gaza, 3 operations. And so many Israelis have now gotten to the point of withdrawing from territory doesn't work. Negotiating doesn't work, so why bother? And they're kind of in this place of we don't know how to move forward, and that is also allowing people who don't want to see a Palestinian state emerge continue to push that idea forward. So there have been many attempts at resolution, but unfortunately, I would argue that each time we didn't have willing actors, and I would say on the Palestinian side, when those offers were made, when the Oslo Accords happened in the 90s, when Ehud Barak made his offer in 2000, when Ehud Olmert made his offer in 2008, those were all willing actors. Those were prime ministers who genuinely wanted to see an end to this conflict and the emergence of a Palestinian state alongside Israel. Now, I would say, there aren't very many actors like that on the Israeli side who are in leadership who can push that to Israelis because of all these rejections and all the pain that has come as a result. But we need to keep trying. My perspective is we need to keep trying. And I will say, I think where we need to start is with education. And that's why I do what I do. And that's why I would say to anyone listening, get educated if you want to understand this conflict. And if you don't want to understand it, then just stop talking about it. Because again, it's so complicated and it's hundreds of years of history. And I've spent 15 years of my life studying it. And I feel like I've barely scratched the surface. And every day that people chime in when they don't know, they're actually just causing more harm. And so we need to have a resolution, but the resolution is going to come when Palestinians are educated, first of all, to not hate. And again, people say, oh, you think they're educated to hate. I implore anyone who's listening to look up palwatch.org, Palestinian Media Watch, and go and watch some of the videos that young Palestinians are exposed to, where they are told to become terrorists. And they don't use that word, they use the word martyr, but they are told to become martyrs. They are told to go kill themselves. Terrorists who could kill people, murder people, are then paid a salary by the Palestinian Authority. And we shouldn't be surprised because they're encouraged to go do it. And so then when they go do it, they're paid for it. And when you go and, you go through Palestinian areas, you'll see that, town squares are named after terrorists who murdered people. And on billboards, there'll be signs of terrorists who killed people. And that's not promoting anything but more violence. And so first there needs to be an education not to hate, but then there needs to be an education that, Jews are from that land. They do have a connection to that land. They are there and they're there to stay. And on the Israeli side, there needs to be an education that Palestinians are also there to stay and that that is also their home and that they're not going to go anywhere. And they have legitimate claims just like the Jews have legitimate claims to that land. And the only way that we're going to even be able to start to get to the point where we can talk about a resolution to the conflict is when both sides recognize that of the other. And yet, not only do not on each side we have people in Israel and in the Palestinian areas arguing the opposite of that, all over the world you have then people who don't know what they're talking about most of the time chiming in saying the Jews are white European colonizers. And so you're reinforcing it for the Palestinians on the ground saying, oh, they are colonizers. Look, this guy on Twitter is telling me so. And if I just hold out long enough and I'm violent enough and I, fight hard enough, Eventually the Jews will leave and they'll go back to where they came from, Europe. And what they have to understand is we did go back to where we came from. We went back to our historic homeland, the land of Israel. And until that is understood, we're not going to get anywhere. And until their story is understood, we're not going to get anywhere. And so I just implore everyone, stop picking a side. Genuinely stop picking a side. Realize that there are legitimate claims on both sides of this conflict. This is not a zero-sum conflict where one side has to lose and the other side's going to win because one side is wrong and the other side's right. There is right on both sides of this conflict. Mm-hmm. And we need to be stressing that right on both sides of the conflict rather than denying it for one side or the other. Mm-hmm. That's the way that we're going to be able to start to make progress and to be able to move forward. And the education needs to change. It needs to change in Israel. It needs to change in the territories. It needs to change around the world. And the more educated people we had walking around talking about this, I guarantee you we would get to a solution much faster. So just get educated and realize you don't have to pick a side. I am pro-Israel and I am pro-Palestinian. I want both of these people to live in freedom and in dignity. Mm. And as a Jew, I also have to stress that no matter what, I have to believe and support in the existence of a Jewish state, because I'm not safe in this world without one. And that also takes an education to learn that Jews have suffered for 1900 years, endless, relentless persecution. And when we didn't have a country, we were not safe. Whenever anyone wanted to rise up and destroy us, they did. And so I have to believe that whatever resolution we come to, there has to be a Jewish state in this world with a Jewish majority, because it's bigger than just the Palestinians. It's about Jews everywhere having safety. Mm. And unfortunately, the world has never been able to guarantee that for us. Mm. And the one thing that has is a Jewish state. Mm. And so, again, I don't know what the resolution is going to be, but I'm pro-Israel, I'm pro-Palestinian, I'm a Zionist for those reasons. And I wish that more people would stand up and say that instead of taking a side. Mm. Stand with innocent people. Stand against terrorism. Stand against real intentional violence against innocent people. Mm-hmm. And we'd be in much better shape. Mm-hmm. Yeah.